Hello, family. How are you today? My name is Quanisha Johnson. I am a licensed counselor and educator. And I today am, as I say every time I come to you, I'm very excited to bring to you a new topic, a new conversation today. We are on theme 3, which is related to our children, the challenges of school age learners. And so today we are going to be talking about bullying and what that looks like for our children and how it impacts them. And so I'm going to share with you so that we can get started on our conversation, share my screen, get our slideshow going. And so as I stated, we are today on session 3 of our theme 3, which is the challenges faced by school age learners. Today, we're going to be talking about beyond sticks and stones, understanding bullying and its effects. And so I don't know if I am aging myself, dating myself rather, with that whole idea of sticks and stones. So when I was a child, there was a saying, and I think it started way before me. That the origin of it goes way earlier than when I was born or growing up in the 1980s and 90s. And there was this saying, and the saying was, "Sticks and stones may break my bones, but words will never hurt me." And I remember seeing that on television, hearing that, and never really thinking about it too deeply until I got older and I really dissected this. And understanding and realizing the impact and the power of what we say to people, understanding the impact of how we treat people. And our children are very, very vulnerable, especially our Black children are very vulnerable to so much that's going on in the world, so much going on through their development. And so, yes, sticks and stones absolutely hurt you, right? If someone threw a stick at you or a rock or a stone, it would hurt. But words also have an impact. And so it makes me think about this quote, which I absolutely love. It's in my email signature. I think it really connects with the whole idea of sticks and stones may break my bones, but words may never hurt me. And this is from the great Maya Angelou. People will forget what you said. People will forget what you did, but people will never forget how you made them feel. So I love this because ultimately we have to consider how our children are feeling. Sometimes we can't quote what someone said to us verbatim. Our children can't articulate the exact words, but you don't forget how something makes you feel. So I think that sticks and stones idea fell very, very short of the idea that it's not about the words, it's the feeling. It's how it makes you feel. It's the impact of someone's behavior on you and what it does to you. You don't forget that. And if we reflected right now on a time in our life when someone said something and it stung and you don't remember what they said exactly, but you know at that moment how you were feeling. So I wanted today to discuss our children and how they're impacted by bullying behaviors. And it's a big deal. And wanting to have this conversation so that we as adults can be advocates always for our children, to advocate for them when they're learning how to speak up for themselves, learning what to do, understanding it from the perspective because they're children and it's challenging for them. So what exactly, I'm always getting into defining. I think defining is very important. And so today we're talking about bullying. What is bullying? And so stopbullying.gov is a website that describes bullying as unwanted. Of course, the word unwanted is important. Aggressive behavior among school-age children that involves a real or perceived power imbalance. And so I know sometimes when we hear the phrase power imbalance, it's wondering what that looks like, what that means. when we say power imbalance, I know it'll be sometimes difficult to assess it, because what does it mean for there to be a power imbalance? And so ultimately, I'll give a few examples. This could be a size a thing where there's a larger child and a smaller child. This could be a power imbalance because of a disability. This could be a power imbalance because of race. So when we think about, let's say, for example, your child goes to a school, which is your child who is a Black child or identifies as a child of color or a BIPOC, your child goes to an environment where no one looks like them. And so that might be an example of a power imbalance in terms of a bullying situation. So it has to, I know sometimes people will say it's hard to assess because what gives someone more power? And there's multiple examples. I'm just giving a couple of a circumstance where it may look like there is this imbalance of power. So if my child is in a school and no one looks like them, and then my daughter is being bullied by, or verbally, or we'll go over the different types, by a group of white students daily, right? And they're being bullied, and she's being called names, and she's being picked on, and then so I'm looking at that standpoint of that is an imbalance of power. If it's a size situation, if it's disability, so it is based upon this perceived power imbalance. And so ultimately, bullying, the behaviors are also repeated over time. And so a situation where someone calls someone a name, which is absolutely, remember, we're going back to that quote by Maya Angelou about how it made you feel. So it's important. So I'm not minimalizing a day or an incident where a child is being called a name, but more so when we're discussing bullying, we're talking about behaviors that are repeated over time. We're saying, of course, that it's intentional in nature, it's not accidental. So the person who is the aggressor cannot say, oh, it was by accident or mistake. It is absolutely intentional. They're intending to cause some sort of harm, whether it be emotional harm or physical harm in some way, shape, or form. And this is the most, one of the most important parts that we need to understand about all of this, about someone intentionally harming you, repeatedly harming you with their behavior, that power imbalance, the child feels unsafe. And so when we're talking about safety, safety is not always related to physical harm. Safety is emotional safety. I want to feel as though if I'm a child and I go into my school environment, I have the right to learn and feel comfortable. And I can go into a school building and get everything that I need so that I can be successful without fear of any type of harm. And so we want to understand that with all of these behaviors in bullying, the repeated nature over time, intentional, the power imbalance, the unwanted aggressive behaviors against that person, that child feels unsafe. And then, so I wanted to also put in here the idea or the concept of harassment, because we often hear together bullying, and then we also hear the term harassment, and they're often used interchangeably. So we'll talk about that as well. So what is harassment? Harassment is a targeted action. It could be a speech, and it's towards a protected class. And I'm going to talk about what a protected class is. It's a group historically discriminated against and treated unfairly. So we can immediately think of what our themes have been these past few months, who we're talking about, right? What type of children? This message about bullying is for all children, but we're talking about our children, right? And so the historical nature of being discriminated against and treated unfairly. So a protected class. So this is inclusive of, and I may not have named everything, age, race, religion, national origin, your disability, sexual orientation. So a protected class, and it's targeted against them. So I said the two terms were used interchangeably. So both bullying and harassment may be intimidating, offensive, and humiliating in nature. But bullying also may be categorized as harassment. But with harassment, we said, once again, the actions are against a person because they're in a protected class. So specifically, it's because, so I'm going to harass you. I'm going to specifically intentionally harass you because of your place in that protected class. So I am treating you differently and harassing you and intimidating you, offending you, humiliating you, harming you in some way because of your sexual orientation, because of your race, because of your national origin. So the person who's doing the harassment is doing so specifically because of that factor. Specifically, you're being targeted because of those things, because of your place in that protected class. So that is the difference between bullying and harassment, right? So bullying could be categorized as harassment. The example I gave earlier about having my daughter, for example, in a school where it's predominantly a white school, and then a group of white young ladies are bullying her. And if they're bullying her specifically because she is the only Black student, then we have bullying, and I'll say that she is being harassed. In a bullying situation, traditionally bullying is investigated by the school. So if there's a situation of bullying, the administrator, the counselors, the teacher has a part in it, trying to figure out what is going on, what is happening. And when I say schools, I want to clarify this as well. And so when we say a school incident of bullying, this could literally mean the school bus. This could mean the school bus. And I know that right now we're in a pandemic, so many children are working from home and learning from their home. But in a situation where they were going to school or going hybrid a couple of days a week, this is, if they are being bullied or harassed on the school bus, that counts as being bullied in school. And so the school has an obligation. The school can't say, you left the building. You left the building, so you got to just, there's nothing we can do. So the school has an obligation to look into it, to investigate when the incident occurs on the school bus. And so now we have, if it's a harassment issue, which could be a criminal issue, there's an informal investigation, right? Informal in nature. Remember, we are not going to the extensive part of it, but the informal investigation, and it's done by every school should be assigned, every Title IX, every school has a Title IX investigator or has someone who is assigned to look at situations like that, right? And so Title IX schools could be held liable for student-on-student harassment. So basically what's happening is the school, this is all federal now. And so based upon a certain law, so we have Section 504, we have the Title IX, which prohibits discrimination based upon sex. The Section 504 and Title II, it basically has protection for disabilities. Then we have the Civil Rights Act of 1964, and that's to protect discrimination based upon race, color, national origin. So we have, I don't want to get so technical with these terms, but basically protections are in place. And so if there's bullying situation, the school will look into it, needs to look into it to see what further action needs to be taken. And if it's a Title IX a situation of harassment, we have those Title IX investigators, or Title IX is someone's going to look into if it's a harassment situation. There's protections federally. And so with bullying, each state has different anti-bullying laws. So your children basically are protected in some way, shape, or form. And those bullying, anti-bullying laws basically force the school to take some responsibility, right? To protect children. And so basically what's happening is that school has an obligation to look into, because they could be held liable for student-on-student harassment, harm, bullying. It is up to that school to look into what that is. So we have different types of bullying. Physical bullying, we have situations with physical bullying, which we can give examples of kicking, pulling, shoving, pushing, right? Destroying of property. Destroying a property, right, is a part of physical bullying. We don't think of these things. Verbal bullying, so it's insults, name calling, and anything where you're verbalizing your, bullying, verbalizing threats or verbalizing some form of harm. We have sexual bullying, right? So with sexual bullying, it's always where it's sexual in nature, sexual gestures, touching, sexual images. I was reluctant to share this story, but I think it's very relevant for our conversation today. And it speaks to the importance of how the impact and how we need to protect our children, that it is this situation of bullying is beyond the idea of sticks and stones, but it's harmful. So I remember growing up and thinking of this type of bullying, sexual bullying, and being a student in elementary school. And there was this I guess culture in my classroom. And in my elementary school, I would be in the same classes with the same students every single year, right? You got classified by, they didn't do it by testing, but you were gifted, and then it would go to then the next level will be E, and then it would go 1, 2, 3. So if you were in 4th grade, you would be in 4G and then 4E, so on and so forth. So I'm giving that background to just say that what would occur was that you were with the same students. There was this culture in the classroom where I would have certain boys in my classroom who would sexually bully, sexually really harass, if I want to use that term, girls in the classroom. I remember being violated, being touched on my way to the sharpener in the back of the classroom, right? So I remember feeling uncomfortable to walk to the sharpener because I would have boys that sat in the back of the class that would reach their hand out when I was sharpening to touch my behind. And I was in elementary school. And my teacher was in the classroom with me. And I knew it made me feel uncomfortable, but I had never had any conversations with anyone about what to do. And it was so repetitive in nature. In a way, I was uncomfortable, but then it was also normalized. So then I would think to prepare my pencils, for example, and make sure I had enough because I didn't want to walk to the back of the sharpener. And so not wanting or not thinking that I could share it. And so, but feeling so uncomfortable in my skin, in my body, right? Because I was objectified. And my teacher was in that room. And her desk situated, and it happened multiple years, situated in the front of the classroom. And it was so natural for these young men to do this to these young ladies. And I don't know that we ever said anything. And so I know now as an adult, it's not our fault, but it is this conversation today to stress what we're talking about, what to look for, what examples of bullying occur, what are examples of harassment, what it looks like, conversations to have with our children. And so I just wanted to share that story because it was very impactful for me. And I wanted to share that because these are stories of our children. So I want us to be informed as parents, as educators, as caregivers of how to support our children, because our children are experiencing these types of behaviors, and some do not know what to do. They don't know what to say. They don't think they can speak up. They may not even know something's wrong with it. They may remember it is a couple of slides back, I mentioned about when bullying occurs, there is a loss or lack of security, or the child feels unsafe. If I was in my classroom and I didn't want to go sharpen my pencil to do my work, I felt unsafe, but never had felt as though I could express that. So this is just a message, a story to just share with the importance of understanding how the harm and the impact that this has on children. So we have physical, verbal, sexual. Cyber is such a thing right now. that is so important to touch upon, especially now. This has been an issue before COVID. We're now in a pandemic, so everything is electronic. So even if your children are going into the school building, ultimately they are in some way, shape, or form doing work electronically. So cyberbullying, it's dangerous because it might be something that we're not even aware of that's happening. Because if you're not aware of how your child or children are utilizing utilizing the internet, this could be very dangerous. So cyberbullying, for example, we have children spreading lies about children. I'm giving examples, posting photos, sending hurtful messages. There's situations where a child will impersonate someone and then send messages as if they're that child to cause some type of disruption or harm in the person they're impersonating's life. Then we have in cyberbullying, we have children who are engaging in social bullying. So they're kind of like ganging up to inflict this type of bullying on another child. We have sending mean messages, making threats. And so even we will see this with playing video games. They have, and I'm not so super versed on the video games, but I remember, there are games in which, for example, I know in Xbox Live, for example, where your child could connect with other people that they don't know. And so I know of situations with children where, playing the game, as innocent as it is, and then being connected that way and being called names, being teased while they're playing. We're going to get into racial bullying, but having that experience as they connect with others. So we need to be mindful if your child is utilizing sites like Twitter, that it could be through tweets, text messages. I've worked with children in situations where in the school day, when we're talking about high school, when children are able to, or students, to utilize their phones, taking pictures. I never forget a very devastated student I had years ago, devastated, could not finish her school day because the students were using phones, taking pictures of her in class, and then putting it on Snapchat and putting a whale over it, a picture of a whale on top of the picture. And then posting that. And so ultimately that, and then ultimately having that circumstance, this child felt unsafe, felt uncomfortable, was looking at herself in a negative way, and was so distraught that she was not able to go back into the classroom and finish her day. So I know I'm talking about one incident, and we said bullying was repeated in nature, but I want to give an example of what some kids are facing daily at school when they go to school. I want to give an example of a place where our students love being online, but if you go online and you have to deal with these situations and you're tormented constantly, it's challenging. And sometimes, when we reflect back to the dinosaur days, when there wasn't, the bullying that I would face, I gave the example of the sexual in nature bullying, at least minimally, when I went home, I didn't have to deal with it because there was no connection. I didn't have to see anything online. I didn't have to see those students or hear something about them. And now our children are faced with, when they are in the building, they have to deal with types of bullying within their school building. And then now they can't shut it off because now it's at home. So now they have cell phones. And so now they may not have looked at a mean tweet, but their friend is like, did you see that message on Twitter? Did you see what that person posted? And so ultimately, it is very important that we're aware of the impact of cyberbullying. That is the new form of bullying that basically is, if your child is utilizing social media or the internet in some way, shape, or form, playing games online, connecting with others, they may be dealing with this type of bullying, and we may not even be aware of it, or as parents or caregivers. So just being mindful of that. So then I mentioned a little bit about racially motivated bullying. And so I want to give a few pieces of information that bring it home. So Black children comprise about 15% of the US school population, right? And these are the most recent numbers from about 2016, 2015, 2016, right? A few years ago. So 15% of the US public school population. However, 35.5% of the reports of bullying and harassment comes from Black children. Look at how disproportionate that is. And that information comes from the Office of Civil Rights through the US Department of Education. And so ultimately, 15% of the population, right? But 35.5% of those who reported being bullied and harassed. And so there is a disproportionate amount of students being reporting bullying compared to the number of students in school. And ultimately, when we see racially motivated bullying, it ranges from verbal assault, it's physical injury, so physical in nature. And these students dealing with this have a greater harm of experiencing anxiety, depression, substance abuse, and missing school. So racially motivated bullying, we talked about that. A student is being bullied because, and we connect this to harassment, as we talked about earlier, because they're in that protected class, who historically has been treated unfairly and differently. So we have to be mindful when our children are going into schools. And sometimes we depending on where they're going to school, and they're making up just this small amount of the population in the school, right? So they're making up this small portion, but yet they're dealing with this. And so they're going into these environments where they may face racially motivated bullying because the student population does not predominantly look like them. And so we want to be mindful of this, mindful of the experience of our children when they go into these schools. And I know it's challenging because we want to send our children to school and we want to look for what we deem to be the best school, but we got to think about what the word best means and what that looks like. And so we want to have these important conversations with our children about what they're experiencing and just making sure that they are not facing this type of harm, this type of bullying, harassment that is related to their race. We just talked about cyberbullying. And so when we see racially motivated bullying, it's more evident in these virtual spaces than we see in school buildings. So this is happening, right, with students that go to the same school. So it may not be as predominant in the physical building itself, but the children are still facing bullying from students they go to school with, but more so in a virtual platform. And that's why I would stress again the importance of understanding what cyberbullying looks like and having these conversations with our children and being aware of their online presence. What is going on online with our children? And so just being aware that we just hear bullying, but what about bullying that's racially motivated? What about how your child is being treated because of how they look? What is their experience because of how they look, because of how they show up in this world? So bullying is very impactful, right? We know that. This is the reason we're talking about it. Once again, beyond sticks and stones, it's not about just words or it's not about that. It's a greater impact. If we talk about this, it's because of we want our children. Remember, our children are going to grow up and be adults one day. That is the hope. The hope is that they are prepared for adulthood and they're in this process of development to get to that place. Along the journey, there are things that get in the way, that prohibit healthy growth and development, that impact adulthood because of what occurred in childhood. So let's look at the impacts. And so we have depression and anxiety is an impact of bullying. Think about this. So when we think about being depressed, imagine how a child feels. And we can especially imagine it if we had that experience. But going to school or being online and feeling as though someone is humiliating you, working to help you feel or make you feel rather less than, the anxiety that comes along with getting up to go to school if you're going to the school building, or dealing with certain children because of how you feel, feeling down about yourself, who you are, how that comment, how that type of bullying makes you feel about you. This is what our children are dealing with in schools, online. And so we want to be mindful of how that impacts them. Isolation, sadness, loneliness, feeling like, because the thing about children, right, no matter where they are in their developmental process, they're social. Even children that, not every child is super social. Every child is not extroverted. Some children are more quiet, more shy, more reserved. Absolutely. But children are social. That's why this pandemic situation is so challenging, because our children go to school. That's why even the idea of like when children are in school, telling them not to talk, I always thought, like, of course, I was a teacher, so I need my children sometimes, my students, to be quiet so they can learn, or I can tell them something for their good and for their learning. But then I'm like, I put my children, and I'm calling them my children because I always looked at them as my children, but my students in like a dynamic where they were facing one another. And how could I expect them not to talk? And so for a student to go into a setting or interact with their peers and feel less than, feel like something's wrong with them, feel like they're not accepted, that just breeds all of these things. It breeds the isolation and feeling lonely. So it's very impactful. And we know that children who experience this are often adults. This continues into adulthood, especially without the proper supports in place. We know that with what trauma looks like and how children are absolutely resilient and can overcome the traumas of their life that they experience, especially single incident traumas, with proper supports in place. So we want to just be mindful of what bullying is and how impactful it is, because we are helping our children through this process of childhood, adolescent, they're growing, they're going through this journey to be these adults. Trouble sleeping and with eating, right? Not being able to eat. Because if you have anxiety, sometimes that impacts, just think about, I think very simply with children, just explaining to young children, like sometimes anxiety feels like the butterflies in your stomach and your stomach doesn't feel good. You don't want to eat, or just trouble sleeping, especially sometimes with, when you're dealing with children who have their own phones, when they get to like adolescence and then they have their phones. And I've talked to people with stories that like it's like a tormenting all night long, where parents have articulated like that they've had their child's phone and the notifications were dinging all night, and the information, and someone giving information, and someone posted this, look at this, all night. So imagine that, right? That rock and that hard place that our children are often in being these social beings who want acceptance, and then also being themselves, and then needing to go to sleep, and their body needing to go to sleep to grow, but yet wanting to be online. And so there's so much, and they're dealing with so many different things, and we have to be sensitive to that. And so we have health complaints. So sometimes you'll hear, I have a headache, my stomach, stomach and your body aches, right? That tension in their head, that stress they're feeling because they're not wanting to to go to school if they're going into a school building, or interact online, or they read something online about them, or someone said something, or every time they get online and they have to work with certain students, or if they want to go onto social media, or they want to just have a good time online, the way that kids love, that someone's bullying them. So you might find these symptoms, right? That's why we need to pay attention to the impact, to these signs. If you're noticing differences, suicidal or harmful thoughts. Now, I will say, bullying is not the cause of suicide. Bullying is not the cause. Someone does not die by suicide or harm themselves in some way, or has suicidal ideation simply because, and I'm using simply loosely, because they're bullied. Bullying is a risk factor. It doesn't cause suicide. It's a risk factor. Just being mindful, because remember, the child, is how they're feeling. Remember, not forgetting. Remember, Dr. Maya Angelou's not remembering, and I'm paraphrasing it to make a point. It's not remembering verbatim, remembering how you felt from somebody repeatedly. Remember, we're saying bullying is repeated behaviors. It's aggressive, it's unwanted. Your child doesn't want to be treated that way on a regular basis. There's a power imbalance. And so just being mindful of what these things are. Decreased academic achievement. I gave the example of the student years ago who had that incident and did not want to finish her classes in the afternoon. Felt so terrible. So we see decreased academic achievement, especially in connection to depression, to anxiety, isolation, loneliness. If you're not sleeping properly. So we have to pay attention to these signs. Do these signs all mean that there's definitely a bullying situation occurring? No. But these are, if we're noticing that our children are experiencing these things, and we notice there's differences in their behavior, we need to pay attention and see what's going on and not take it for granted. School avoidance. So not even wanting to go to school. So maybe even waking up and not wanting to go and saying, I have a headache, my stomach hurts, that anxiety, and not wanting to school. And as they get older, wanting to drop out of school, not wanting to go. If school represents that for you, you don't want to go there. So just us all being mindful of what this looks like, what the impact is, and supporting our children. So how adults can be helpful. I think this part is very important. Understand what bullying and harassment is. So doing our due diligence as adults, understanding what it looks like. I gave examples earlier of all of the Title IX, Civil Rights Act, and Section 504, Section 2, all those examples that are all technical, and we don't need to memorize those things, but we need to understand that there are protections in place, that your state has an anti-bullying law, that there are federal protections when our children are being bullied or harassed, that there are such things as racially motivated bullying, that harassment connects to a protected class of people. And I have Black children, and so my children are a protected group. Historically, we have been mistreated, and that didn't stop. It didn't stop, and it continues with our children. And so ultimately, understanding what bullying looks like. We don't want our children to face any single incident situations, but it's not bullying if it's a one-time thing, but we still need to protect our children. So that one day doesn't become day 2, day 3, day 4. Then here is a month and the same child or this group of children are treating our children that way, or every time they're online, every time. We don't want that. So we need to have an understanding of what it is, what it looks like, and then knowing just what the laws are. What is your school obligated to do if it's a situation involving other students within that school? And knowing what you can do, how you can support your child. Pay attention, as I said earlier, to any behavioral or emotional changes in our children. So every situation is not going to be bullying, but we need to pay attention to any changes. So that last slide, talking about depression, anxiety, sleeping, paying attention and being attuned to these things. What does it look like? Is something changing? Did my child once love school and now they don't want to go? And once again, of course, we're in a pandemic. There's several reasons why children don't want to go to school. They don't want to, some of them don't want to go right now. They've been home, and then they're going, if they're going a couple of days a week for some of your friends are there, some aren't there. So it's uncomfortable. Like, it's just a different atmosphere. So I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about like really paying attention to when something changes and figuring out what the root issue of that change is. And so we don't want to just look for physical changes, which we often do. We can sense that or tell that, right? But like behavioral or emotional changes, are they acting differently? Am I noticing sadness and looking into it? So that's how we can help, paying attention. Open the lines of communication, asking open-ended questions. So instead of saying, how was school today? What answer will we normally and traditionally get from kids? Good, okay. We want to ask more details about what's going on, and not in a way, as they get older, it seems invasive when you're a teenager. Just asking questions, like specific, and it could be as simple as asking like questions about like, so how was, what was something fun that happened in school today? Did you guys do anything interesting? Just those questions, so you can get more, instead of how was something good or bad, or yes or no. So when we're asking open-ended questions, you're getting more details. I know you had a test in science. How was that test? How do you think you did? So like your friends in school, do you have a lot of classes with your friends that you talk to, that, your friends? And then you might get from that person, oh, math class, I don't have any of my friends in that math class. And then, okay, no one's is there any in that person, that class you talk to? And you may get details of, no one talks to me. And then get more details about that situation. So basically my point, I'm giving examples, is that we need to open those lines of communication, ask questions about what went on. We drop them off to school, or they're logged in online. And then we need to just be very communicative about what's going on, so that we can step in when necessary. If there is something going on, so we have identified that our child they may have been bullied or being bullied in school, we need to make sure that we are communicating with the school staff. We need to have a conversation with the teachers, administrators, whomever, the school counselor, and we need to be in line with communication with them, and make sure that they know what's going on and that we can get the right support. When children are feeling as though they are in a situation where they're feeling unsafe, they're in need of as much support as possible. How can I support them? When you feel unsafe, you need to feel like you have support. So communication with school staff is crucial. Is this a situation where in the classroom, was the teacher present? As my story I gave earlier, where every time I went to that sharpener, my teacher was in the front of the classroom. And I know from communication with my friends, and I'm speaking of elementary school, I'm not talking about middle or high school. And middle or high school does not justify being touched, groped by another student. But I was in an elementary school, and I had wonderful teachers. I thought they were wonderful. But this is an example of, I was in a space where the classroom could have now ultimately long-term become the representation of an unsafe environment, an uncomfortable environment. And so ultimately communicating with school staff, if you are a school staff member, it is, if you notice something, if you hear something, it is important to act immediately. When we're teachers, We're in that classroom, so much is going on. And so ultimately it is looking with a third eye and listening with third ears. And that is the challenge. I understand. It's so hard, especially now, when you are in school, and if you go to school and you're a teacher, you're just wanting to keep yourself and everyone safe during this pandemic. So there's so many moving parts, but there needs to be in order for us to support our children, there needs to be a very healthy communication between school staff and families. Understanding, as I stated earlier, the state laws on bullying, federal laws on harassment. There are multiple cases that you can just kind of skim over to say like the gist of what happened, just gaining some information and knowledge of what this looks like. How have children who have been bullied been protected in the past? How have children who have faced harassment been protected? What does that look like? What does my state say? What's the obligation? If I'm communicating with school staff, what is the obligation of my school? How can they support my child? What are they obligated to do? This is so important. That's why I have an exclamation mark. Remind the child of their worth and their value. Remind them and help them to restore this level of confidence. Remind them who they are in spite of what their circumstance is. In spite of the situation, they need building up. If bullying is occurring and it's repeated, remember, I'm saying these terms again, repeated in nature, intentional, aggressive, unwanted. So think about, you're already in this developmental part of your life, this stage where you're trying to figure out who's your friend, what you like, what you don't like, how you see yourself, how the world sees you, right? This all goes through these school age years. So you're just going through all of these different things. And to experience bullying, to experience harassment, it may make that child question their worth and their value. So we need to make sure, even before, or even if a child is not facing that we are constantly reminding our children of their worth and their value that have nothing to do with someone else. That our children aren't validated by anyone. Their confidence may be shot down. To help build, speak life into them, help build them up. Encourage children to use their voice. And so in this situation, it's not like myself not using my voice when I was a child. And I'm, like I said, once again, when we're encouraging them, we're wanting them to understand that nothing's their fault, right? It's not your fault someone's treating you the way they treat you, or doing something to you. It's nothing that you did. So using their voice is speaking up when it needs to be spoken, when something needs to be said, standing up for yourself, telling someone, telling an adult, telling a teacher, speaking up to that person, standing up for yourself, depending on the circumstance. We want our children to be safe. So when they're speaking up against the person harming them, we want to make sure that they understand that they're in a safe situation. We don't want them harmed. But using their voice and speaking up and knowing that their voice is important, they're important, and utilizing their voice. They don't have to say, well, I can't, today we hear kids say, I can't snitch, I can't tell. You to say that it is okay to stand up for yourself. It's okay to tell mom, dad, grandma, your teacher, you're being harmed. Utilize that voice. That voice is meaningful and it's powerful. More of how adults can help. And so cyberbullying, which we talked about, be aware of your child's online activities and be prepared to intervene when necessary. Be aware. I know sometimes children can go off and be on their tablets, their devices, and they're quiet and we don't know what's going on. It's so important to know what they're involved in, who they're involved with, who they're talking to, and being prepared to intervene. Sometimes because it's cyber, it's more challenging, because when it's cyber, your child may be getting messages that are threatening or harmful, or pictures, or anything that signifies bullying, and then they may not think or know that they can come to you, or they may brush it off. They may be experiencing something, feeling uncomfortable, but they need to know they can come to you. So just being aware of what they're doing online and being prepared to intervene, to give parameters when it comes to being online, and giving parameters as it relates to the amount of time, what sites they're on. Let them know like what, we're saying in the beginning, as adults, we need to be educated on what bullying is. Having that conversation ahead of time with our school age learners of what it looks like, what it feels like, what you may feel like, and giving them that information so they're empowered. What cyberbullying entails, what it looks like for that child, so they know when they're online and they have any of these experiences. So if it's racially motivated, like I gave the example of gaming, doing the games and you're playing with strangers. And, with racially motivated situations, there's going to be bullying that your child may not even be aware of, that they're being bullied. They may not even be, you're playing the game, you're having a good time, and you're being called names, or it's racially motivated. So they're picking on you, saying things to you that connect to your race, but you're playing. So there's conflict now. You're thinking, okay, this doesn't feel good. I don't like what they're saying to me, but we're playing. I'm playing, I'm having a good time. So having your child be aware, right? Remember, using their voice, be aware of what this looks like, giving examples of what it might feel like, when they're having this experience. And like I said, just the awareness for us as parents, as adults, as caregivers. We don't want to just tell and I'm gonna have that word just here, to ignore them, right? Because that used to be the way. Without the context of everything we're talking about, without empowering them, without building them up when they feel knocked down, without encouraging them to utilize their voice, without explaining what bullying, when you're in this situation, what you might feel like emotionally, without the context of what everything is, we don't want to just say. Of course, we don't want to empower, because the bully. And the bully is we can get into a whole nother conversation about the bully and what the bully has going on and why they're choosing to bully, right? Ultimately, and look at that from that standpoint. So we may be parents, caregivers who have a child that may have been bullied. We also may be parents and caregivers who have a child that's doing the bullying. And there's complexity in that as well. There's more to the bully. Absolutely. And so ultimately, we don't want to just just say ignore. We want them to ignore. We don't want to empower the bully by just playing into it so they could feel, so that bully can keep going. We don't want to do that. But ultimately, we don't want to just ignore. We want to tell our children to grab an ally, get with a friend, walk away if necessary, stand up for yourself if it's safe. Do something so if we're ignoring, but we're also empowering them to say, you don't have to take that. You don't ever have to stand in a situation and let someone harm you. You don't have to go back and forth with them. So that's an aspect of ignoring, that I'm not going to allow you to harm me and me just go back and forth with you, or me to stand there and allow you to do this to me. So, but it can't just be, which I've heard, I grew up with that language, being told, oh, just don't pay them attention. And nothing else. They need more. They need more context. They need more information. They need more support than just ignore it. Ignoring is great. We don't want to empower, like I said, we don't want to give attention to, but that's not enough to just say ignore. They need more tools. And the tools are all of the things we are talking about right now. We're a tool. We're the tool. The adults are the support. And so ultimately, we want to have these conversations ahead of time because we want to empower our children. We want to make sure they're safe in all aspects of safety. Absolutely. We don't just want to say ignore them. We want to give them more context. So there's some resources I wanted to provide. There is a great resources. These resources are great for children and for parents. There's activities, there's information. I talked about the laws. I talked about federal laws, state and federal laws, what bullying is, definitions. There's so much on these websites, pacer.org, stopbullying.gov, stompoutbullying.gov. Have your children look through these things, your school age learners. You read it with them, go over it with them, empower them, so that if something is not happening now, we don't want our children to ever face anything like this, to be harmed in any way. But this is happening. This is absolutely happening, especially cyberbullying. I think I'm stressing cyberbullying so much just because our children are predominantly online. They're online so much. And like I said about cyberbullying, it's hard to escape it the way that you do when if you were bullied in school, and you get to at least have some peace when you walk through your door. But when you have situations where you're at school and you have to come home and you want to get online because you enjoy it, and you have to face and deal with these things, it feels like never ending and that you can't escape it. So just wanted to provide resources. These websites here, great information, great things to look at to get to empower us as the adults, and especially our children. So important. Schools have events. I am today. I know it's challenging to look at my shirt. I'm gonna get up a little bit to show it. It says be original, loyal, and daring. And this was a shirt designed through an event a national event called Unity Day. It's an anti-bullying day that schools recognize every year. And you'll find information about that on the pacer.org website. And we designed these shirts to let our students know to be bold, to be original, loyal, and be original, loyal, and daring. In the back says just be you. And so the color for the Unity Day is orange, and it's an anti-bullying day. So there's events in schools. If you're a parent and you're not aware of how this looks, to go to these websites, go to pacer.org, find out what Unity Day looks like, and how Unity Day empowers students to come together to fight against being bullied. Like I said, we designed these shirts for students to empower them. They wore them every year. This event happens in October. And so communicate with school, figure out what's going on there, so there could be this kind of support system all around children, all around our students. And so I wanted to show that shirt because I thought it was something, like I said, we did this every year just to let children know we support them. So of course, we're at our reflection activity time. And so what we're going to do right now for this week is we're going to write an inner child's letter. And so there's that inner child in us. So it's that part of us that has those wounds, that part of us that is vulnerable, that part of us that may have experienced pain. And so we have that inside of us. Sometimes it's unhealed. And so what I'm wanting you to do today, we're talking about our children and their experiences. And I gave an example earlier of an experience that I had as a child, where I experienced a form of a type of sexual bullying. And I was very uncomfortable, and I didn't share with anyone. I didn't know that I could tell anyone. It happened repeatedly. There was a point where I was uncomfortable, but I didn't know that I should say something. I had the adult in the classroom. So I gave that story earlier. And so if you are an adult and you've watched this today, wanting you to write this letter. Was there a time when you were bullied or harassed as a child? Think back to your childhood, right? Like the way I can reflect on mine. When you write a letter to that child. So although that child is you're going to write a letter to that child. That child still exists. For me, that was a very harmful experience. For me, that made me look at my body in a certain way. I didn't know the word as a child objectified, but I felt very uncomfortable in my skin. And so ultimately, what you're going to do is you're going to have some reflection. So take some deep breaths, reflect on this time about where you may have had this experience. And you're going to write a letter as the adult you to that child. Think about in your reflection, what did that child need? I think back to myself and what did I need to hear? What did I need my teacher to do? What did I need my parents to do, or my grandparents whom I was at home with, to do for me that didn't get done? And once again, I'm not placing a blame, right? Because blame doesn't solve anything. And so reflecting on yourself at that point in your life and what did you need? What can the adult you say to them, to that child, that would help them feel more secure? So what could I say? Dear Quanisha, how can I talk to the elementary school? I'm going to think specifically the sixth grade, to Quanisha. The adult me speaking to sixth grade Quanisha, and what did she need to hear? What did she need at that time when she was feeling insecure, unsafe, objectified? What can the adult me say to that sixth grade young lady? If you have a picture of yourself at this age, sometimes it's helpful. So you can look at it and just kind of take yourself to that place and remember. And then you read, because you're writing a letter to that part of yourself, right? That experience where you needed to hear those words, you needed the support because you were experiencing any of these things we talked about today. And then read that letter to that child. Read it. And so the source, we want to work on our healing. And we've talked about that. The more that we heal, that we reflect on our experiences, we're more equipped to help our children. We're more equipped. And of course, their experiences are not our experiences, but we want to heal so that we can help and support them. And so ultimately, this was what our conversation was about today, right? We want to make sure that we're understanding how they're feeling. We don't want them to face any harm. Bullying is a real thing. And we want to be aware of what it looks like. We want our children to be aware, and we want to provide the best resources possible for them so they can overcome anything that harms them or causes them to feel any level of insecurity. So we are at the end of our conversation today. And I hope the information provided gave you resources and tools that will support our children. Remember, our theme this month is about our children and how we can help them to be the best that they can be. What are their issues? What are their concerns? So that was what our conversation was about today. And so, as always, please and thank you. Take care of yourself, take care of each other. And we are specifically and especially talking about taking care of our children, and be well. And I shall see you for our next topic next week. Thank you. Take care.